In the late 1800s, Polish immigrants came to Chicago chasing work freedom and a home their divided homeland could no longer give them. In the crowded blocks of Polish downtown, they built new lives inside tiny kitchens, where steam, smoke, and the smell of cabbage told stories no history book ever could. They didn't have much, just flour, onions, and faith, but somehow they turned scraps into comfort, from beet soup made with bones to sausage skins stuffed with rice and hope. Every meal was survival served with pride, because in those narrow streets, food wasn't just dinner, it was proof they belonged. Stick around, because the 25 dishes you're about to see didn't just feed families, they built a community. One, pierogi z kapustą i grzybami, dumplings of survival. If you walked down Milwaukee Avenue in 1895, you could follow the scent of frying onions and find a mother rolling dough on a wooden table, making pierogi stuffed with sauerkraut and mushrooms. These weren't the holiday treats we think of today. They were weekday survival food crafted from whatever scraps were left after the factory shift. Cabbage came cheap. Mushrooms were foraged from vacant lots or nearby woods. Together, they became a filling that stretched a pound of flour into a meal for eight. The doughs, thin as paper, wrapped around those humble treasures like a promise. When boiled and browned in butter, they fed both stomach and spirit. Kids called them Polish pockets. Fathers took them to the rail yards in tin pails, and for one bite, life in the smoky city didn't seem so hard. Today, you can still taste that same defiance, a reminder that even in hardship, the Polish heart knew how to make something beautiful from nothing. To Kiełbasa wiejska, the smoke that built a neighborhood. Before the skyscrapers and steel mills, you could walk through Chicago's Polish downtown and follow one scent that ruled them all: smoke. Not from factories, but from backyard smokehouses, where families made their own Kiełbasa wiejska, the rustic farmhouse sausage of home. It started on paydays, when workers pooled coins to buy pork trimmings and garlic. The meat was ground by hand, stuffed into casings, and hung to dry over slow burning oak. That smoke told the whole block someone was doing all right. It wasn't just food, it was pride, community, and a reminder that even in a foreign land, flavor could connect you to your roots. On Sundays, neighbors traded links through open windows. A slice with bread and mustard was enough to make a man forget the clang of the mills for a while. Today, every Polish deli in Chicago still carries that same spirit, proof that the scent of survival can become the perfume of tradition. 3. Zasmażana kapusta, the humble cabbage feast. In the cramped kitchens of Polish downtown, cabbage was queen. Cheap, filling, and always in season, it showed up in nearly every pot. But when times were especially hard, families turned it into zasmażana kapusta, braised sauerkraut cooked slow with bits of bacon, onions, and mushrooms. The secret wasn't the ingredients, it was the patience. Mother stirred that pan for hours, letting the sour edge mellow into something deep and smoky. The smell drifted down the hallways of tenements, warm and comforting as a blanket in winter. Kids came running the second they heard that familiar sizzle. It meant dinner would taste like home. Sometimes it was served with a slice of rye bread, other times just by itself, but it always felt like a feast, even when there was little else on the table. This was food that taught a simple truth. You don't need wealth to create warmth. You just need a cabbage, a skillet, and a reason to keep going. 4. Bigos, the hunters' stew that never ended. They called it bigos, but to the Polish families of Chicago's working-class flats, it was known as the pot that never ran out. Every household had one simmering on the stove, a stew of sauerkraut, cabbage, and whatever scraps of meat could be found. Pork one week, beef trimmings the next, maybe even sausage, ends from a friendly butcher. It was hearty, smoky, and slightly sour, the kind of dish that tasted better each day it sat. Bigos wasn't just a meal, it was a living memory carried from Polish forests to American alleys. Immigrant, fathers swore it made them strong enough to face the brutal winters, while mothers said it kept families together when everything else fell apart. If you lifted the lid on a Sunday night, you'd smell history, sweet cabbage, sharp wine, and the faint scent of smoke from 100 years of resilience. That's the beauty of bigos. It never really ends. You just keep adding to it, like a family story passed down from one kitchen to the next. 5. Gołąbki, cabbage rolls of hope. When money was thin and bellies were empty, Polish mothers in Chicago turned to the same trick their mothers used back in the old country. Gołąbki, cabbage rolls stuffed with rice, onions, and a few bits of ground meat, if fortune allowed. Each leaf was carefully blanched and wrapped like a small gift, tied together with love and patience. The rolls simmered in tomato broth or rich drippings, filling the air with a scent that made even the smallest flat feel like a castle. Families gathered around cheap tables, and for a few minutes the city's noise faded away. These weren't just rolls, they were symbols of endurance. A single head of cabbage could feed a family of 6, turning scarcity into something almost sacred. Old timers used to say you could taste a mother's worry and love in every bite. And in that moment, when the sauce hit your tongue and the warmth filled your chest, you remembered why you came to America in the first place, to build a life worth sharing, one cabbage roll at a time. 6. Barszcz, uszka, the beet soup that carried home. In the heart of a Chicago winter, when the wind howled down the alleys and coal smoke clouded the sky, nothing comforted a Polish family like a steaming bowl of barszcz, siuszka, beet soup, with tiny mushroom-filled dumplings that looked like little ears. It was more than soup, it was memory. The bright red broth glowed against the gray of the city, reminding everyone of Christmas Eve dinners back in Poland. The beets stained everything they touched, spoons, aprons, even fingertips, but no one cared. The deep, earthy sweetness was a taste of home. Mother saved beet peels from pickling jars and used mushroom scraps from the market. The broth was humble, but it felt royal on a cold night. Children dunked bread crusts into it until their plates were clean. For Polish immigrants, barszcz wasn't just food, it was color in a colorless world. A reminder that even in the hardest times, you could still sit down, lift a spoon, and taste something beautiful. 7. Kluski śląskie, little dumplings, big comfort. In Polish downtown, a sack of potatoes could go further than a week's wages if you knew what to do with it. And no one worked that magic better than the women who made kluski śląskie, small, round potato dumplings with a thumbprint in the middle, boiled till they floated like tiny moons in the pot. They were soft, chewy, and comforting in a way only homemade food can be. Served with gravy, mushroom sauce, or just a spoon of butter, they filled stomachs and silenced worries. Kids loved to pop them in their mouths one by one, laughing as the steam fogged the kitchen windows. For immigrant families, these dumplings were survival disguised as a treat. When meat was scarce, Kluski made the plate feel full. When the rent was due, they stretched the meal another day. Each batch was a quiet act of resilience, a reminder that joy didn't come from what you had, but from what you made with your own two hands. 8. Żurek, the sour soup that saved Sundays. In the heart of Chicago's Polish tenements, Sunday mornings began with the sharp, sour smell of żurek simmering on the stove. It was a soup made from fermented rye flour, poor man's broad, born out of patience and thrift. But in those days, it tasted like a luxury. Every Polish mother kept a jar of starter on the windowsill, bubbling quietly through the week. When the weekend came, she stirred it into a pot with sausage ends, potatoes, and a hard-boiled egg or two. The flavor was tangy, smoky, and comforting, like bread and bacon had melted into one. Neighbors joked that you could tell how rich a family was by how much sausage floated in their żurek. Yet even their poorest bowls carried pride. It was food that proved you didn't need wealth to eat well. You just needed time and heart. For weary workers coming home from the mills, that first spoonful wasn't just soup, it was homecoming. 9. Kiszka, the blood sausage of survival. In the working class flats of Polish downtown, nothing went to waste, not even blood. When a pig was butchered, the scraps, grains, and organ meats were mixed with spices and barley to make kiszka, a dark, rich sausage that turned poverty into sustenance. Mothers boiled the links gently, then fried them crisp in cast iron pans until the casing snapped like paper. The smell filled the hallway, earthy, smoky, a little wild. Neighbors would poke their heads out of doorways just to ask, "You making kiszka tonight?" For families scraping by on pennies, it was power food, packed with iron, fat, and strength for men heading to the stockyards or steel mills. To them, kiszka wasn't strange or grim. It was proof that nothing from the animal or from life itself should ever be wasted. Some said the taste reminded them of the old country. Others said it simply kept them alive. Either way, it was the flavor of endurance, rich, humble, and unmistakably Polish. 10. Plaki, ziemniaczane, the golden pancakes of the poor. When payday was still days away and the cupboard looked bare, Polish mothers reached for their one dependable friend, the potato, grated, salted, and fried in bubbling fat. Those humble spots turned into plaki ziemniaczane, golden potato pancakes crisp on the edges and soft in the middle. The smell alone could lift spirits. It drifted through hallways, mixing with the sounds of kids laughing and the crackle of frying oil. Some ate them plain, others with sour cream or a spoonful of applesauce, if they were lucky. But for most, it wasn't about toppings. It was about warmth and survival. These pancakes fed whole families for pennies. They required no luxury, only effort, and somehow they tasted like celebration, even when the week had been hard. 11. Pączki, the sweet escape. Even in the hardest years, Polish families in Chicago refused to let joy disappear from the table. On cold February mornings, just before Lent, the air filled with the smell of frying dough. That meant Pączki day had come. Mothers woke before dawn, mixing flour, eggs, and little sugar if they could afford it. The dough was soft, elastic, alive under their hands. Once fried, it puffed up golden and round. Then came the jam, usually plum or rose, spooned right into the center. For one morning, the tenements felt like heaven. Kids lined up for their turn, hands sticky with powdered sugar, laughter echoing down the halls. It was a reminder that even the poorest families deserve sweetness. To the Polish immigrants, pączki weren't just donuts. They were defiance, a way of saying, we may be poor, but we are not broken. And when you bit into one, warm and fragrant, you could taste that hope in every crumb. 12. Kopitka, the hoof-shaped taste of home. When the pantry ran low and only a few potatoes remained, Polish mothers didn't worry. They made kopitka. These small, soft dumplings, shaped like little hooves, turned simple leftovers into something heartwarming. Mashed potatoes mixed with flour and egg, rolled into ropes, sliced and boiled until they bobbed to the surface like tiny gifts. Served with butter, onions, or a drizzle of gravy, they were quick, filling, and full of comfort. In Polish downtown, you could smell them in every hallway on payday afternoons, a scent that meant a mother's ingenuity had struck again. Children called them little horses, racing to eat the first plate. Fathers packed them for lunch, knowing a pocketful of kopitka could keep a man going through a long factory shift. There was nothing fancy about this meal, but in those kitchens it was magic, proof that love, not money, made the best food. Each dumpling was a small reminder that even in the grind of immigrant life, joy could still fit on a spoon. 13. Makówki, the Christmas memory in a bowl. When the snow piled high outside and church bells echoed through Polish downtown, families gathered around their tables for one sacred dessert, makówki, made from poppy seeds, milk, honey, and layers of sweet bread or nuts. It wasn't just a treat, it was Christmas in a bowl. Mothers ground the poppy seeds by hand until they shimmered like ink. They stirred them with sugar and milk until the kitchen smelled of warmth and peace. Every spoonful was rich and nutty, filled with stories of the old country, where this same dish was served after midnight mass. In those tight Chicago apartments, makówki reminded everyone that even far from home, the spirit of tradition could still fill the room. It didn't matter if the bread was stale or the milk was borrowed from a neighbor. Each bite carried a prayer, a memory, a promise that no matter how hard life got, there would always be something sweet waiting at the end of the year. 14. Sernik, the cheesecake of celebration. In the crowded kitchens of Polish downtown, Sernik was the dessert you made when life finally gave you a reason to smile. Weddings, baptisms, holidays. If there was joy, there was cheesecake. But this wasn't the fancy kind from bakeries. This was humble, homemade Sernik, born from farmers' cheese, sugar, and patience. Mothers whipped the cheese smooth, folded in eggs, and baked it slow until the top cracked just enough to show it was done. The smell, sweet, creamy, with a hint of vanilla, floated through the tenements, pulling kids to the kitchen like a magnet. Sometimes they topped it with resins or a thin glaze of jam, but most times it was plain, because the real sweetness came from what it meant: a victory, a birthday, a family still standing strong. In a city that could grind you down, Sernik reminded Polish immigrants that there was still beauty in simple things like laughter, love, and a slice of cheesecake shared after a hard day's work. 15. Fasolka po kluski, beans and dumplings for the working man. In the factory district of Chicago's Polish downtown, dinner had to do one thing: fill you up after 12 hours on your feet. That's where fasolka po kluski came in, a thick stew of beans, onions, and soft dumplings that could stretch a handful of ingredients into a hearty family meal. White beans simmered all afternoon in an iron pot, soaking up smoky flavor from a scrap of bacon or sausage if you had it. When the broth turned rich and creamy, in went the dumplings, pillowy, tender, and ready to soak up every drop. The result was simple but satisfying, warm enough to chase away the chill of a Chicago winter night. It was a poor man's feast, no fancy cuts, no waste, just comfort in its purest form. And when father trudged home covered in soot or sawdust, that first spoonful reminded them why they worked so hard. because fasolka po kluski wasn't just food, it was strength served in a bowl. 16. Pierogi ruski, dumplings of comfort and memory. No Polish kitchen in Chicago was complete without pierogi ruski, soft hand-pinched dumplings filled with mashed potatoes, onions, and farmer's cheese. They weren't glamorous, but they were the taste of home carried across the Atlantic in memory and muscle. Mothers made them by the dozen on wooden tables dusted with flour, their hands moving fast, their stories flowing just as easily. The filling was rich but humble, made from yesterday's potatoes and a little cheese saved for Sunday. When boiled and browned in butter, they turned golden, tender, and unforgettable. Families gathered around chip plates, slicing pierogi, open to watch steam rise like a blessing. For kids, it was love you could taste. For parents, it was survival disguised as a small luxury. Even now, Polish delis in Chicago still serve them the same way, with caramelized onions and a dollop of sour cream. Because some flavors never die, they just keep reminding us where we came from and how good it felt to belong. 17. Śledź w śmietanie, the sailor's supper on land. Before refrigeration, Polish immigrants in Chicago relied on one ingredient that could outlast any journey: salted herring. And when payday was thin, they turned that humble fish into śledź w śmietanie, herring in sour cream. They soaked the salted fillets overnight to soften the brine, then tossed them with onions, pepper, and a generous spoon of sour cream. It was cold, tangy, and sharp enough to wake you up after a long factory shift. Some served it with boiled potatoes, others with rye bread and pickles, washed down with a sip of beer if the budget allowed. This dish carried the taste of the Baltic Sea all the way to the Great Lakes. For many Poles, it was the closest thing to home they could afford. Even today, in Chicago's old Polish delis, you'll find it in glass jars behind the counter. A simple, honest food that's outlasted empires and immigration waves alike. Because śledź w śmietanie wasn't just dinner, it was endurance on a plate. 18. Ryba po grecku, the immigrants' fish feast. In the bustling kitchens of Polish downtown, ryba po greku, literally fish in the Greek style, wasn't Greek at all. It was pure Polish ingenuity, born from scarcity and a desire to make something special out of very little. Fried fish fillets were covered in a rich sauce of onions, carrots, celery, and tomato. Vegetables stretched chin to feed a crowd. The dish was bright, hearty, and smelled of comfort. A little miracle pulled from the pantry. On Fridays or during Lent, when meat was off the table, Ryba po greku felt like a feast. Immigrant mothers served it cold or warm, depending on what the day allowed. It was humble enough for the weekday, yet beautiful enough to serve at Christmas Eve. Each bite told the same story: that Polish families didn't need wealth to eat with pride. With just a few scraps, they could turn hardship into heritage and transform an ordinary fish into a dish that tasted like dignity itself. 19. Crocchietti, the crispy rolls of celebration. When Sunday finally came and the week's work was behind them, Polish families in Chicago treated themselves to crocchietti, crispy crepes stuffed with mushrooms, cabbage, or meat scraps, rolled tight, breaded and fried until golden. The process was slow, deliberate, each crepe cooked one by one, each filling seasoned by taste and memory. Mother stood over the stove humming old Polish songs, flipping batter with the same rhythm their mothers once used in Krakow or Poznan. The smell, earthy mushrooms, sizzling butter, drew the whole family to the table before the first batch was even done. served with a ladle of warm broth or a spoonful of sour cream. Croquetti were proof that even the poorest kitchens could create a little luxury. They often appeared at weddings, Christmas dinners, or Easter feasts, symbols of care, effort, and love wrapped in a golden shell. For the working class Poles of Chicago, that first bite of croquet wasn't just a meal, it was celebration itself, crisp and tender, shared by everyone who had fought their way toward a better life. 20. Rakushi's Yabukami, the sweet scent of Sunday mornings. Before the first church bell rang, Polish mothers were already in the kitchen, slicing apples thin and whisking batter by hand. That's how every Sunday morning began, with the rachuchi's yabukami, apple fritters fried golden in sizzling fat. They were simple: flour, eggs, milk, and apples. No sugar if the week had been tough. A sprinkle of powdered sweetness if fortune smiled. The fritters puffed up in the pan, releasing that cozy scent of cinnamon and fruit that filled every corner of the flat. Kids would hover nearby, waiting for the first one to cool, just enough to grab and run. It wasn't a fancy breakfast, it was love disguised as food. After 6 days of factory shifts and long walks in the cold, that one morning of rakushi felt like a holiday. Even today, you'll find Polish grandmothers in Chicago flipping them the same way, because no matter how far from home life takes you, the smell of apples frying in butter will always lead you back. 21. Macaron z kapustą, the poor man's pasta. In the late 1800s Chicago flats, fancy Italian pasta was for the rich, but the Polish families downtown had their own version, macaron z kapustą, noodles tossed with sautéed cabbage and onions. It was simple, filling, and smelled like home.
To po prostu będzie na więcej osób i tyle. Także 3 szklanki makaronu tutaj wrzucić kapustą.
Or lard until it turns sweet and golden. A sprinkle of salt, maybe a few bits of bacon if payday had been kind.
I można, niech się prezentuje.
As the city howled outside, but inside there was warmth and laughter. Children didn't care that it was cheap food. To them, it was comfort. The crackle of cabbage in the pan, the clatter of forks, it all meant family.
Także nie ma co
Mothers
szarżować.
knew this meal
Porcyjka.
could stretch a few pennies
No.
into something that felt like
Mógłbym
plenty.
powiedzieć.
To this day, that same humble combination lives on in Chicago's Polish kitchens, a quiet reminder that even in hard times, you can still make something beautiful from the simplest things. 22. Smażony carp, the holiday fish of faith. Every Christmas Eve in Polish downtown, the sound of sizzling oil and soft prayers filled the air. That meant smażony carp, fried carp, was on the stove. It wasn't fancy, but it was sacred. For generations, Polish families had served it as part of Wigilia, the Christmas Eve supper that marked both faith and survival. Men bought the fish live from barrels on Milwaukee Avenue, carrying them home in buckets that splashed the cold December streets.
Takiego karpia zasypuję i drugi kawałek. Tak zostawiamy i czekamy, aż się
Właśnie taki jest potrzebny.
strasznie strzela ten.
There was no meat that night, only fish, bread, and memory. Children waited with wide eyes, knowing that one bite meant Christmas had truly begun. Even today, Chicago's Polish families keep that ritual alive.
Jeżeli będę pokazywał, jak się rybę smaży, chcę wam tylko pokazać, jak ta moja...
Bombs kept across oceans and generations.
Ten karp bardzo fajnie będzie smakował, jeśli te przyprawy będą w środku, a ości nie będą przy...
23. Kasa, gryczana z grzybami, buckwheat and the forest's gift. Long before quinoa and wild rice hit American tables, Polish immigrants in Chicago already had their own ancient grain, kasha, gryczana, buckwheat. It was cheap, earthy, and full of strength, the kind of food that could power a man through a 12-hour factory shift. Cooked with butter, onions, and wild mushrooms gathered from nearby woods or local markets, it became kassa griciana z grzybami, a simple, soulful dish that brought the taste of the old country to the new world. The buckwheat had a roasted aroma, the mushrooms added forest flavor, and the whole kitchen filled with that deep, nutty smell that made everyone stop and breathe for a moment. It wasn't a rich man's meal, but it was rich in memory. Father said it reminded them of Poland's forests. Mothers loved it because it filled hungry bellies fast.
Ja już nie dodam.
Carried a quiet
Kasza jest
pride,
gotowa,
proof that even in a city of
mięciutka,
iron and
aromatyczna i
smoke,
przepyszna.
the heart of the homeland could still be found in a humble pot of grains and mushrooms. 24. Babka ziemniaczana, the potato loaf that fed the block. In the tenement kitchens of Polish downtown, babka ziemniaczana, potato loaf, wasn't just dinner, it was an event. You could smell it baking 3 doors down. That mix of grated potatoes, onions, eggs, and a little bacon fat, rising from every window. It started as a way to stretch the ingredients. Mothers grated potatoes until their hands ached, seasoned the mix by feel, and baked it slow until the edges turned brown and crisp, while the center
Ona już
stayed
troszkę
soft and
ostygła, opadła,
steamy.
była tak ładnie
When it
wyrośnięta,
came out
no
of
więc
the
można ją
oven,
podać.
families gathered fast, slicing it thick and serving it
Babkę
with a
podaję
dollop of
gęstej
sour
śmietany.
cream or
Jest
just a
naprawdę
pinch of
rewelacyjny.
salt. Some said babka ziemniaczana was better the next day, eaten cold with bread. Others swore the first slice was pure heaven.
Gotową babkę i
Either way,
podajemy
it was
z
food that
odrobiną
lasted,
kwaśu. Będzie
comfort
również
that
pyszne.
could feed a family through long winters and long weeks. In a neighborhood built on hard work, this humble loaf proved that the simplest things often filled the biggest hearts. 25. Kompot z suszu, the drink that tasted like memory. When the holidays came and money was tight, Polish families in Chicago didn't buy fancy drinks. They made kompot z suszu, a warm, fragrant drink brewed from dried apples, pears, prunes, and whatever fruit had survived the year.
Wody
Pot simmered
wystarczy.
slowly,
One były trochę
the water
dłużej niż
turned
15
golden
minut.
as the fruit
No i
softened
teraz
and
pozwolę
released its
sobie
smoke.
przelać
The whole
trochę
kitchen
do
filled
świąt.
with the smell of smoke, space, and comfort. Kids love to fish out the plump bits of fruit at the bottom of their mugs, while parents sat quietly, sipping the warmth after a long week of work. Kompot z suszu wasn't just a drink. It was tradition in liquid form. It told the story of families who refused to waste anything, who could turn even dried scraps into something beautiful. Served at Christmas, Easter, or any moment of rest, it was the final chapter of every meal, the sweet reminder that life, like fruit, could be boiled down to its essence and still taste good. When you walk through Chicago today, past bakeries on Milwaukee Avenue, or the faint smell of smoked sausage drifting from a deli door, you're not just breathing in food, you're breathing in history. Every pierogi, every cabbage roll, every pot of beet soup still whispers the story of people who came with nothing but their hands, their faith, and their recipes. In those late 1800s kitchens, Polish immigrants didn't just cook to survive, they cooked to belong. Each meal was a quiet declaration that home isn't a place. It's what you build from love, struggle, and shared hunger. Their food turned alleyways into neighborhoods, strangers into families, and survival into something sacred. These weren't just dishes. They were building blocks of a community that fed a city's soul. And somehow, a century later, that same smoke, spice, and sweetness still lingers, proof that the heart of Polish downtown never really disappeared. It just moved into every kitchen that remembers.